I'm Ray Lawler, the founder of Ultralight Startups and the organizer of the New York chapter. And I'm here today to talk about, or we're here today to talk about Ultralight Software as a Service, which is a topic that should be of interest to just about everyone who's running an Ultralight startup. I sent around a blog post that Ray sent me last week from ReadWriteWeb. Which I think gave a great explanation, kind of like the overview of why software as a service is important and why that's the delivery mechanism of the future, which I think Ray will be talking about a little bit more. But I think the gist of it was that there used to be something called the Wintel platform, and that if you were a software developer, you would need to write for Wintel, and software that runs on a Windows machine on Intel hardware. And nowadays, that platform is the cloud, and that is software is increasingly delivered over the web, and that's the way people are expecting it to be delivered. And that is an effective delivery mechanism for consumers. There's challenges to software as a service as well, and in particular, any of those of you who are users of Gmail. Earlier this week would know that it was down for a good 2 hours, I think a couple days ago. And even the almighty Google, who never fails at anything, sometimes fails at maintaining its service level. And obviously that was a big black eye for Google. And imagine what it would do to your Ultralight startup if you had an outage of that magnitude. You'd probably lose a lot of customers, and it would be bad for your brand. So the question here is, how can we, as ultralight bootstrapped entrepreneurs that don't have a lot of venture capital and don't have a lot of time and money to invest in big hardware infrastructure and support staff, maintain a level of service that's cost effective and that allow you to scale your business. So we are very lucky to have our esteemed panel here today that Ray is going to be introducing in a moment, sharing their secrets on how they have done this for their own startups. And we've got a number of startups from different elements and different places along the chain of ultralight or of software as a service, and so we'll hear from all those. But first, I'm going to introduce Ray, who's going to introduce the panel and take it from there. So Ray is the founder and CEO of Socialibrium. We've seen him pitch earlier, a software company that provides relationship management tools for people who don't use traditional CRM. I happen to have known Ray even long before Ultralight Startup started. We were colleagues at Deutsche Bank for several years, and he's still working with Deutsche Bank as he's working on Socialibrium and organizing Ultralight New York, helping to organize Ultralight New York. So Ray's got his hands full, and he's got his own software as a service company, and he is ideally placed, I think, to moderate this panel. So thanks very much, Ray.
You saw me pitch, and my business right now is aimed primarily at mobile devices. But looking ahead, I am looking to migrate to delivering the product, through as a hosted solution, right, from a software as a service model. So in talking to Graham about some of the challenges I was considering in the next phase of my company's evolution, these were some of the questions that came to mind, right? So I'm personally very excited to have the panelists here to talk about some of these things. I've spoken with each of them before, in the past few weeks, and just it's a really interesting discussion. So I'm hoping to kind of bring out some of the points we talked about, as well as some of the questions you guys had in the panel discussion this evening. So what I want to do is introduce the panelists, just highlight a couple of those questions that I know I've been kicking around, and hopefully you guys have seen, set the scene, and then we'll move into the panel discussion, which is meant to be very interactive, right? I have a couple of questions that I know I have that will hopefully kick things off, but then very much want you guys to drive the discussion, right? So please feel free to step up and ask questions. So without further ado, we're here to listen to what the panel has to say. So to introduce them, we have Peter Stern, who's the founder and president of Zendy, which provides a number of things online through email, collaboration tools, and some other pretty cool software. In the 90s, he was one of the co-founders of Datech Online, which was before it merged with Ameritrade, was the #4 online trading platform, right? Which I think puts him with a really interesting breadth and depth of experience. And I'm very excited to have him on the panel because he does bring that experience of delivering a trading platform in the 90s and into the 2000s where there's not much that's more mission critical than a trading platform, right? That thing goes down for seconds, people lose money, get really angry. So I'm interested to hear how that compares to some of the experiences we've had now with Zenby, where we have email and other services which are equally as vital, right? As Graham mentioned, a lot of people in this room have experience with the Gmail outage. We then, next in line, have Steve Greenwood, who's the head of business development at Dropio, which basically is a platform for simple private exchanges. You can share files online, and they're starting to expand out into other services with other partners. Before that, he was in management consulting and venture capital, and interestingly, worked at Home Depot corporate office, leading a Six Sigma effort there. I'm really excited to hear about how Dropio has worked with some of the partners to expand the product on building a really interesting model for a software as a service to use, right? Because you have this platform, you put money into it, and how do you leverage that? Next up, we've got Jed Alpert, who's the Chief Strategy Officer of Mobile Commons, which provides web-based applications for text messaging, voice calls, and web-based interactive components. Before that, he's the president of a film production company, which probably is something very cool to talk to. If anyone got a chance to talk to him at the networking event before he teased out, and was an attorney before that, where he served on multiple company boards. And I think Mobile Commons is a really interesting product. It's not something that, when you think of a traditional SaaS company, it's not something you would have ever purchased as a shrink-wrap software, right? What it's basically taking is a new method of delivering software with some new technology and merging it into a pretty cool solution. And then finally, we've got Steve Asherman, who's the founder and president of Base One International, basically a firm that helps successful SaaS startups and businesses address some of their business as well as technical issues. And he's taking that expertise and using it to launch their own SaaS company. And I think that the perspective that he brings there, seeing multiple companies address the SaaS problem or SaaS delivery of a business solution and bring it to his own solution will provide some interesting commentary, hopefully some interesting best practices. So I think with that, just to set the scene a little, some of the questions that we posed, I think in your brochure and you've seen online, really talked about upfront expenses, landing clients, supporting clients, dealing with, how do you maintain your service, deal with outages, and handle growth. And I've seen this, the way I see this is it breaks down to kind of three main buckets that I wanted to try to use to drive the discussion this evening, right? And what are the problems and issues that you encounter when you are a startup, when you're starting up, when you're starting to then move into running your business, and then once you're running this business and you have your core set of clients and things are starting to gel, how do you scale, right? How do you grow? And then kind of just to talk about SaaS and set some definitions around it. I think software as a service can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. The way that it's kind of helped me to frame it really was this Read Write Web article that really puts SaaS, it's a user interface on top of, for example, a cloud computing stack, right? So it's not necessarily cloud computing. What it is it allows you to get some sort of service or software through the web that maybe you would have purchased previously as a shrink-wrap software, or downloaded it and kept it locally, or in the case of Mobile Commons, something completely different. So that's how I've kind of thought of it. To kick things off, if we kind of go back to thank you. The first part, right? What are some issues that you deal with when you're starting a company, right? You have this idea for a solution, you decide you want to deliver it, as a service over the web. What are the challenges you face? And I thought to kick things off and provide some compare and contrast here. And Peter, comparing contrasting your experiences launching Daytech online versus now Zenby. I mean, what are some of the things you've observed, and what are some of the different types of challenges that you've faced?
Well, I mean, they're two very different companies in very different times in very different spaces with very different customers, right? So it's really hard to provide an apple-to-apple comparison of any type. The the expenses, obviously, the real thing you care about is today you can start a company, maybe not like Datic Online in the financial services area where there are certain fixed costs like legal compliance, which are exorbitant by ultralight standards. I don't recommend anybody start a brokerage firm as their first ultralight company. That would be ludicrous. But technically speaking, and from a marketing and technical and customer support from those areas, the things you can do today with, say, 2 or 3 people part-time in an office, with virtualization, with cloud computing, with the technologies available today versus like 13, 15 years ago when I was doing this the first time, it's just insane. I mean, think of a world, it's hard, a lot of you guys are connected to the internet at home. The fastest would be an ISDN line. Remember what an ISDN line is? That's what I had in my home when I first moved to New York. Now, this line was so unbelievably slow, it's absurd to even talk about it compared to state standards. So we couldn't really run Datic Online on our desks with DSL lines because DSL lines didn't exist. The computing power was fine for what we needed, but the networking capacities didn't exist. The technologies didn't exist. I remember with extreme excitement the first day a switched router showed up from 3Com. We got like one of the first switched routers back in 1995, 96 for our trading desks. So the amount of leverage an individual person has working with cloud computing, working with virtualization, with Amazon, for example, the things you can do are obviously, beyond the imagination of what we had in 95. Is that me?
Time's up, sorry.
How awkward. I thought it was on silence. So it's something to keep in mind. Now with that though, the question is, what do you do with all that power? What do you do with it? Because, anybody can do it too. So you have to find businesses where there's some bricks and mortar hook, to use a really old term, some other service aspect that gives you a competitive advantage. And those are the kind of things I look for when I make my angel investments, for example. But I don't know, does that answer the question?
I guess were there any kind of lessons you learned that then you applied in launching Zenvi, right? Or had the landscape changed so much that you kind of had to adapt to?
Yeah, only poorly. Only that's a mistake. Yeah, I should have known that one coming. One of the advantages that people have now, which it was hard to correlate to Zenvi versus Datic Online, is there was no blogosphere, there was no Twitter, there was no way to reach people except through actually putting letters on a piece of paper and having those papers stack up in a newsstand, or paying for TV ads or radio ads. There was no other way to reach people. So now, of course, you have social networks, you have the blogosphere, you have Twitter, you have this vast array of ways of reaching customers, of finding targeted niche customers in various segments and exploiting those connections and reaching people, which just didn't exist. So in the terms of marketing, you need specific messages to go to specific locations in all these areas and reach those customers. And that's something that we at Zenvi have found difficult to exploit, but it's a lesson that wasn't learned at Datic Online because all we could do was run New York Times ads or Financial Times ads and things like that. That's all that existed. Online ads didn't even. Datic Online was the largest consumer of online banner ads in 96, 97, 98, but the market was so impossibly small, we were just one of the first people to be advertising because the market, we were one of DoubleClick's first customers. These things didn't exist when we started Datic Online. So the world we live in today, it's hard to appreciate in 2009, but it is so, so amazingly different from just 15 years ago.
And to kind of take it to, so that marketing angle I think is interesting, right? Because that's kind of how you acquire your first customer set, right? That's how you go from taking a concept, building it, and then you've got this thing, right? This business, the service, the software. How, I guess for some of the other guys, how, as your company was going through that, and Steve, I think an interesting perspective is, as you are now moving into that starting out, how do you go about acquiring that first set of clients? What were some of those marketing tools you used that maybe were, low cost yet really highly effective to get this first evangelist?
I think one of the things that what we would say at Dropio is that we had this vision of where we thought the world was today, where we thought it was going forward. And that's kind of like our holding principles. And then from there, it starts with as little money as possible, and we had a lot of the benefits it sounds like you didn't have in 1995, where for less than 50 grand, we built the original Dropio. And we're able to get have the holding principles, have the execute on with the initial funding, get something up there that we could share with larger professional investors, and also show consumer passion, that there was some grit to things, that they could use it in some sort of way. We didn't go from there to trying to get McDonald's or IBM or somebody really large to use us, but literally would a graphic designer use us? Would someone, an architect, use us? And then that spurs these kind of concentric circles as you grow forward. But I think it starts by just building like the basics around, founded by kind of some holding principles.
I'm not exactly the right person to talk about the best way to acquire customers, since I've always supported websites that where the problem has been they get successful, and because of the designs that were used, they start running into bottlenecks. And it's interesting to me that no matter how much things have changed, one thing that you can say consistently is that the business vision on one side and the technical execution on the other is generally from a very small group of people that was the same 20 years ago as it is now. And even if you look at successful products that were built in the 80s or 90s, even from the largest companies, if you look hard, you find there are very few individuals that sponsored, pulled it off the ground on the business side with a clear vision of where of a business case that made sense. And then on the technical side, people who are able to execute and build what are fundamentally what I would call database applications, information storage and processing applications, and do that in a way that could scale and keep up with the demand that the business had. And in general, most of my experience has been coming in to help companies as they start to see the scale causing them trouble. And that's become a greater problem over time, because as the price of databases has gone down and as people have used more and more storage, the kinds of problems that very large companies have had, now we find smaller companies that are dependent on the huge amount of information they've collected and processing that efficiently. Suddenly the problem that was an IBM problem or a government problem is now the problem of a small startup that's making revenue, but may not have even lasted all the way to success.
So I mean, one thing, Jed, I think that you and I spoke about was, the way that you started Mobile Commons was, not your typical startup story, and I think it provides an interesting insight to, an alternative way to kind of launch something.
I would just say, like, the second two items are very related. I can only speak as a business-to-business company. We didn't go out and get consumer customers, so we don't need nearly as many customers, and we charge them. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, we're a business-to-business company, so we're not seeking, millions of people who pay a small amount of money, but we're seeking larger, not necessarily enterprise-level businesses, but businesses that will pay us money on a very regular basis. And I think the key for us was not just landing clients, but really going after the clients we knew that likely shared our vision and that we could work with very, very closely and love them. Spend a huge amount of time with these early customers that would help us tell our story, that we could help, that we could show ROI with, that we could show these incredible, and we have incredible use cases from the early part of the company, and make sure that we spend a lot of time with them and really listen to them as we're developing the product. Because with anyone, I don't really, this is the only time I've ever been really directly connected to a software company, but I assume it's always the same, which is you build your product and you were wrong, and it's not exactly how people are using it, you're going to change it, and really spending a lot of time listening to them, how they're using it, and use them to tell your story. And where we were successful, we made a lot of mistakes, but where we were successful early on was providing unbelievable customer support and unbelievable attention that really masked over the times we were going to fail. Just remember, SaaS company is really a website, and no one really knows what goes on behind it. And early on, it's like, a bunch of people working late, covered in wires, doing everything manually, trying to make it look like it's something that really works. And as we're building, the back end behind it, it's like a Potemkin city, and you have to really really love your client. I mean, I can't emphasize this enough. Providing customer support like crazy to get through that period and get them to be the people who get you more customers.
I think that's a really good segue into that second phase, right? Is kind of, you've got something, you have that initial set of clients, and now how do you support them, right? Especially as a company that's trying to manage itself on as low a cost base and prolong capital, minimize burn rate as much as possible, right? How do you provide that incredible customer service, right? Especially, it's easy to do when things are going well, right? But what do you do when things go poorly, right? I mean, if Google can't, operate without an outage, what do we as ultralight startup, what chance do we as ultralight startup stand?
Well,
I mean, so I'd be interested to hear do you have some really interesting stories of spectacular outages?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so one of the things about the Google outage that I found so fascinating, and the Twitter outages, like all the outrage over the Twitter outages that happen all the time, I mean, would you rather have people not care about your outage? I mean, did anyone really abandon, I mean, how many people that you would care about actually abandon their Google accounts because of a few hours of outage? I don't know how many times I walked into my multi-million-dollar Outlook Exchange establishment at Dates Online, and it just didn't work for the day. And we, Microsoft, we paid them $1 million a year for 2,000 people, and it just wouldn't work for a day, a few times a year. And yeah, you expect more from software a decade later, but I think even today, I call legal companies and all sorts of companies like, oh, I can't get you those documents, my email's down. What? So, I don't know. I mean, I think that the fact that everyone's screaming about it just tells you how important and valuable the brand and the franchise are. Same thing with Twitter. I mean, is Twitter become like the major communication mode for kidney transplant donor lists? I mean, is it really someone going to die because Twitter's not working? No, but people get so excited about it when it's down. So I think, I mean, you don't want to be down. I mean, I'm not saying you want to fail, but the highly publicized outages are actually great branding. It's evidence of a great brand.
Yeah, I mean, any publicity is good publicity, right? But I mean, I guess one of the things that I know I've considered, right, is, especially when you don't have that established brand, when you don't have the recognition of Google or Twitter, I mean, how do you, maintain that level of trust with those newly acquired customers if you as a small business, essentially have an outage or, aren't able to provide the SLA that you agreed to? How do you make good on that?
Tell them right away when there's a problem. Never try and conceal a problem. The customer should never be the one who discovers the problem. Of course that happens, but make good on it and have backups. Have like a manual way of doing something and go and do it. And go to the office, go to their office and fix it. That's the critical part.
When we started selling software to developers, we weren't ready. We shipped the software, and one of our customers is stuck with us all the way from when he worked at HP to now he's retired in Thailand, building systems for restaurants. Said what made the difference to him was that no matter what the problem was, we got back to him right away with real answers, not canned answers, not the kind of answers that you sometimes get from
AT&T,
but also from most sites where you're not paying anything, where you're using the service for free. So what you're really trying to do is get paying customers. And when it comes to paying customers, they'll be forgiving if they get treated very well when you have a problem. And they'll remember it if you go out of your way to be responsive. And so I've always felt that when a paying customer has a problem, they find a bug, that gets escalated in front of everything. That's actually, as hard as it is sometimes for the sales guys to go along with, that's actually more important than the current sale you're working on. And getting that across to customers, they'll be more forgiving. And what you don't see, that's one of the main complaints about Web 2.0 type operations and a lot of the free operations. There's nobody you can call There's nobody who you send an email to and you get an actual human response, not a mechanical generated response. So one of the biggest things that you can do as a startup is to put a human touch in, to stay all over the problem, to escalate that problem all the way up through the company, and bust through the fire you got to go after.
You know, I think all these comments make a ton of sense, and I think back a little bit about how what I just spoke about a moment ago, like getting that initial graphic designer, the initial architect, and you put this in like kind of a framework. If you've heard of like Moore's curve of customer adoption, you have, you know, if you again start off with these very sophisticated customers that expect everything to work right away, you've like set yourself up for expectation setting that you're going to fail. And so I think back to like thinking about like a framework in which you pursue your customer and the way you build your product, it's impossible to serve them right. But if you get that initial graphic designer working with you, he actually or she actually will enjoy being part of that process with you. And it's part of like the passion you connect with him, and then responding and being available and having a phone number and all those things really matter a lot. But I think it's that expectation level, and then as you know, for us as Dropio, we evolve as a company along kind of our customer roadmap or our product roadmap. The stakes get higher, the expectations get higher. But I think starting off with the right group and being internally consistent with the right customer set really matters.
I mean, I think what I'm hearing is that basically a problem, right, or an outage or an issue, you know, is an opportunity to engage even more closely with your customers, right? And that opportunity is kind of, you know, many ways you can turn it around and use it to your advantage to build loyalty.
But I just want to emphasize, going after the right customer right away. If you had that problem with Pepsi, you'd be blackballed. You'd never work for Pepsi again. You know, Pepsi would be one of the biggest customers you'd ever have. I mean, so that's really, really critical. And the customers that you super serve in the beginning become incredible broadcasters of client leads not very far after that.
I mean, yeah, I think, Graham, questions?
Are we going to take any questions? Or,
Yeah, no, I was just basically use up.
Okay, and I just want to say, speak up if you can, because we can hardly hear you in the back here.
Sorry.
All of you.
Okay.
Guys, questions on it?
So, I guess this might be a naive question, but is Twitter software as a service, or does that make every website software as a service, right? I guess I'm trying to understand, like, what's the distinction between something deployed on the web and something that is a software as a service?
I have no idea. I always think of it as that when you sell software as a service,
We
you're
can't
just,
hear
We
you.
can't hear you at all.
you're just renting a login. I mean, all software services is you sign up on the web and you drive it from the website. Whatever it is, whether it's hiring people to come to your house over the web or whatever it is, you're just accessing it from the web, and you don't download it onto your computer or have it in your house as a box.
Yeah, I mean, I think the distinction I would draw, right, is you look at a TweetDeck, right, which I would very much see as a piece of software you download, right, and it sits on your desktop, right, versus that I would see as software, versus say Twitter, right, is essentially an online platform, right, that you can be in a browser, right, you don't actually have to download something to your desktop. So using that distinction, personally, I would say, yeah, I would say qualifies as software as a service.
Well, Twitter's free. So I just want to make that distinction. I think the distinction that software as a service has come to mean is if you take a look at Salesforce.com as an example of software as a service versus the older enterprise model of you buy a package for managing your prospects. You install it in-house on your own servers. And so there's an interesting trade-off. What's happened with software as a service, people are saying, no, I pay for usage. And by the way, I don't want this software, I don't want to have to take care of the software myself. I want you to take care of the software. And from the vendor's viewpoint, it's a tremendous change, because it means instead of having 1,000 sites out there that each have their own copy of a package, now there's a centralized way of making changes, bringing things up to date, and it requires a tremendous amount of trust. The trust is, for instance, Salesforce.com is a classic, where it's some of the most valuable data you've got, which is, who are my prospects? You are depending on someone holding that data for you in the same data center that your competitors are also holding their prospects. So here you've got something your whole business depends on. It's very sensitive data. You're paying for it just like you would in-house, but you're getting tremendous advantages. And it's really the historical trend is as the internet gets faster, there are more and more applications that can be held at a centralized site, controlled, and instead of sending out packages to different users.
One more on that.
Software as a service is more when the logic is performed remotely. And to me, while you say this thing new, it's not really new. It's still time shifting. We remember adapting when we started with. But it's if you look into a logic from like telephones relate software as a service, or in client punch information in, and logic is performed elsewhere. And while technically a website is software as a service, you're really looking where you can put your data and logic in the hands of someone else to connect and do functionality. And that's really where you start getting some benefits because, as I said, if one site's update, one system to clean up, push all changes and securities in one spot, as opposed to thousands and thousands of installations of different levels. So to me, that's where SaaS. I mean, is Twitter really SaaS? Kind of. Kind of one that's in between sites. That's the least to me.
Fair enough.
I think the points that you brought up about trust and Salesforce.com treating that data and how the trust that the company gives it to you. Having Gmail versus your own Exchange server, or having your own CRM package versus using Salesforce.com. And there's a question to the panel, I guess. When you use Salesforce.com, obviously you're going to trust them with the data. You're going to trust them that they're going to keep it confidential and not lose it, and so on. As a startup, you say, hey, I'm a startup, I want you to be my 60th client, or whatever it is, first client, and I want you to trust me with your very important confidential data. How do you go about that at the very beginning?
We had that problem. We were holding mobile phone numbers for the ACLU. I mean, the level of security concern was extremely high, and in that case, we just really had to expose and get it. And we spent money to get people to go and investigate it and give a report. But that was a big issue all the time, particularly holding sensitive data for political organizations and stuff like that, where people are actually actively trying to steal it all the time. And it was really of the few real sort of outside views of our company that we paid for to show to other clients. That was one that was worth it. Was having forensic and legal experts come in and talk about and report back to our customers the security level that we were dealing with. It was totally it came up all the time. Never comes up anymore. It came up all the time. And was worth sort of getting that clearance on.
And so it sounds like that's another example where that transparency with your clients is critical, right?
Yeah.
If they're going to trust you, right? If they're going to trust you when there's an outage, if they're going to trust you with your data, right? You need to be upfront and transparent with them.
And bring it up front. Just say, I know you're not going to trust us, but here's why you should.
Why does it not come up anymore?
Because the government is a client. I mean, just because
you're
people
a
just
client
assume
list.
it's a client list.
Yeah, just one generalizable principle I was thinking about is that the authenticity is a huge part of marketing today. I think even more than ever before, and the ability to be transparent the way you were able to be, and literally exposing the system, and really goes a long way. In a way, and people have this kind of perception, I need to keep things private, I need to keep things hidden from my users because it's too secretive. I think there's this push in the total opposite direction right now. You want to be overly open about things, and it's actually a great way to be about marketing your services as well.
Question
In the
over
long run, how stable is a business model built on software as a service? If you rely on Twitter for something that you will pay lots of money to buy this short code like 404 or any kind of code, you will pay lots of money, but essentially using that functionality to build a business. And if they go down, or for example, I'm a big user of Amazon Elastic Cloud, if Amazon Elastic Cloud goes down, then all of my customers are essentially I'm responsible for that. So in the long run, if you rely on somebody else's service and you sell this service to somebody else as a mediator, how stable is that?
Well,
Does it have any kind of?
not every software as a service works on the Amazon platform. You know, we have our own.
I just give an example.
Yeah, no, but that's a big issue, right? I mean, because you have to make sure you're good and you have a lot of redundant backups and that you're stable. And I mean, it requires investment. You can't do it very light for that long if you're successful.
If I understand your question correctly, I mean, this is like instead of you owning the whole stack, you're using other partners as part of it. Is that kind of what you're saying? And you have to rely on
For
these.
example, somebody built over a Twitter application
Right.
that gives the ratings for restaurants.
Right.
They go to the, let's say, Meatpacking District, they tweet a rating, and they receive a rating, and they build a website. But first, they use Twitter. They don't buy their own short for SMS. Second, they use somebody else's reviews, like any kind of restaurant reviews, so their content is not even theirs. So essentially, they build a whole business model around third-party services.
This happens all the time.
Right. And I have a problem with that because legally it might be an issue in the long run. And second, if these services go down, let's say, I mean, I'm predicting that if Twitter goes out of business, then what you do?
Yeah, I mean, having any single point of failure in your business is a risk, right? And I think one of you guys mentioned when we were talking about the outage issue is just make sure you have a backup plan, whether that's people coming into the office and sorting stuff manually or just phoning clients or whatever the case may be. I think it's try to figure out your plan B and plan C and plan D.
But you're always building the platform. It's Windows, when you're developing a C++ application. What if Microsoft goes down building it and Windows is no longer there? You know, it's building on top of something over time.
Question?
This is a related point, and it's something that's been brought up a couple of times. Scaling. I think a lot of us in the room are thinking about, you know, what happens if we have the best problem of all, is that we have 5 billion people coming to our website. Are there any actionable items that we can take going forward to really prepare for scaling and preparing to address those security concerns that we just touched on? Or is it just like,
You mean like, what kind of answers are you looking for? Like human factor scaling, technical scaling? I mean,
I guess all of the above.
ooh, that's a big question.
What was that?
That's a big question. I mean, one of the reasons I think a lot of ultralight startups are excited about cloud computing in general, and maybe Amazon in particular, although, you know, Azure might be coming out, who knows. But it's just the idea that when you build your application from a technical point of view, when you build your application control structure, because you want to run it on a bunch of different clusters, and you're not paying very much to run it on 50 clusters versus 5, you might as well run it on 50 just for a reliability point of view, you know, geographically isolated, blah, blah, blah. You can talk for hours about the technology behind it, but it's so cheap to run it in a highly parallel architecture. Why not? It gives you scalability, it gives you redundancy, it's cheap, and you end up designing your entire application from the beginning to be inherently scalable. So when startups that I talk to frequently start out now, for them to double their capacity usually is very easy. Triple it, very easy. Multiply the factor at probably 25 very easily. Beyond that, maybe it gets a little harder. They got to hire some smarter people. But you know, when you start out using these virtualized technologies, you design for scalability by default. It's just so easy to do it. Which, again, 10 years ago, that's not how you did it. I mean, financial companies would just buy the biggest IBM mainframe they could and plop it down and just hope they don't grow. The IT department would just hope they don't grow faster than they could buy another big box. So, like, when Schwab was down one time, a highly publicized event, they were down for a week because one of their mainframes blew up. So it's just you're building on something else, but it's a good way to build it on something else. It's not bad.
Steve, I mean, in our discussion, I think you mentioned that this question was a real turning point for the way Epoxia Dropio did business. I mean, when can you maybe talk a little bit about what drove your decision as you hit the scale and what you guys did?
I think he explained it extremely well. Basically, we very early on decided everything should be in the cloud. We are 100% in the cloud, and it provides tremendous ability to scale. And also, thinking about it from a business model perspective, even a few years ago, when you weren't able to host things in the cloud like this, you had to plan ahead 12, 18 months about how much server capacity you would need. It takes a lot of capital to do that, and a lot of planning, and then you might have spikes, and who knows, depending on your business model. Yeah, and so here, we scale up or down just based on usage, and it's extremely easy. I have really not much more to add than what you had said.
Well, it's also a business, scaling is more of a business issue, and for us, what we did is we took in to scale, we took in venture capital and fired me. And brought in a real CEO, and because it's really business process where scaling is very, very difficult. What verticals do you go into? What salespeople? Really hard questions about where you're going to invest that require very experienced people in the verticals in the area and the industry that you're in.
But there are some things that you can do technically. One of the advantages of a lot of business applications is that when you really think about what it is they're trying to do, their distinct grouping of data that makes it possible to design systems that run in parallel. If you are Salesforce.com, then what is one of the things you can say? Well, each of my customers, the businesses that are my customers, could be handled separately. So now that means that I can spread that work across multiple machines. And so if you start looking at what are the natural dividing lines of the business, you can start to model how would I do things in parallel? How would I offer some customers better service than other customers because they're paying me more? How would I take something that can run on one box and run it on several boxes? Asking yourself the question of, well, where are the logical bottlenecks? And making sure that in building one of these systems, you don't add any bottlenecks that aren't inherently in the business, which is easy to do and is the way things were built, it's called the scale up versus scale out argument. So financial services firms especially tended to like scaling up, that is bigger and bigger boxes, and what companies like Google and Salesforce and more companies have discovered is that scaling out because of the growing improvements in commodity hardware is really the way to go. And that gives you this redundancy automatically, so that while you're giving great service, they're spread out, but in an emergency, if this thing went down, you could run them both on the same box. And I think that's one of the attractions of the cloud for people.
Because I think just doing a quick time check, I think we might have time for one more question. I know there's one of our panelists has to cut out, and then we can either keep going here or kind of retire, move over to do it.
Yeah, I think we're talking a lot about tech, and just really quickly kind of go back to the definition of what we're here for. Ultralight startup is obviously one of the definitions is that it's self-funded, and obviously that's not forever. And so everybody goes into business thinking like, wow, every VC is going to come hunting for me, and I got the next big thing here. But that's not the case with a lot of us here, and I'm sure with some of you. So when you start thinking about where you were, and obviously you knew venture capital, as Jed said, is inevitable at one point, because as soon as you get to a point of expansion, you cannot fund it on your own, and you need smarter people and more resources. I guess my question is for especially Stephen Greenwood, just knowing the business, it's a consumer business, it's a B2B business. What was really in your heads, and maybe even Jed as well, when you start thinking about a strictly hybrid business like that, would you have preferred to take funding from the beginning because you saw wow, we could scale this, or was it something where you said when we get up to this?
No one would have given it. We didn't know what our business was. No one would have given us money at any reasonable. It just wouldn't. It didn't make sense. It was much better for us to have a business and to be able to say, hey, here's our not our idea for maybe a business, but our actual business with customers. By the way, our VC called every one of our customers. I mean, it's just a very smart thing to do too. But and that we didn't know how much money we needed. I mean, I would have guessed 10 10 times more than we actually needed if I'd had to guess, and we would have wasted it all. And it was much better to do it this way, I think.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd say is back to what we were talking about before about thinking about like your product roadmap, your customer roadmap, what your end goal is, what you're trying to do, and then kind of reverse engineering to where you are in that moment. And so for we do in many different ways, we could have done advertising. We could have charged for doing any sort of files, or we had done lots of different things right away to make money. And we had a different perspective on what we were trying to achieve, and there was other tests or experiments we were running along there. And so I think it comes back to like understanding where you want to go, and then coming back to say, okay, well, how do I do this today? Well, getting the right results from certain experiments, from getting the right customers, the right product, and then it's helping me along the curve where I want to end up down the road. And so I think you can do it a lot of different ways, and today it's so much easier than even a few years ago from stories we've already heard tonight, where you could not have done this for built Dropio for under 50 grand to start with.
Guys, I think on that note, I think it sounds like, to answer the question, is it possible to launch an ultralight SaaS company? It sounds like the answer is yes. I think we heard some interesting stories. Love your customers, deliver excellent customer service, be transparent, right? And then when it comes time to scale, try to figure out the most cost-effective way to scale and do so in a resilient and redundant fashion, right? So you minimize the amount of time you go down to it. So I wanted to thank the panelists for their time.